For those of you I haven't met, I'm Carter Smith, and I work for all of you at your Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and it's my privilege to be the moderator for this afternoon's session on land stewardship. For those of you who are not familiar with the Lone Star Land Steward program that is sponsored by the department in concert with many, many partners around the state, it's really the preeminent recognition program for farmers and ranchers and landowners from one corner of the state that are really setting the bar very, very high for the stewardship of our lands and waters and fish and wildlife. And our goal this afternoon is to introduce you to three of the state's finest. Three that represent country from the piney woods to the rolling plains to the hill country and the South Texas brush country. I'm going to introduce all three of our panelists, ask them to share a few words about their operations and what it means to them to be a steward in the Lone Star State, given all of the myriad challenges that private landowners in our home ground face, trying to take care of our home ground. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A with the audience. And so we want this to be interactive. We want to hear what's on your mind and give these consummate land stewards a chance to share with all of us a bit of their wisdom and counsel about what it means, again, to take care of our home ground. To my left is Dr. Paul Burns. He's a native son of Brown County. He and his wife, Tony, ranch the family country that's been in Dr. Burns' family for almost 140 years, started by his grandfather, Colonel Burns. Got a fascinating life history, served our country in Vietnam, went to UT, medical degree from Baylor Medical School, is a specialist, an expert in something called otolaryngology. I don't think he learned that word in Brown County, but to put it in perspective, he's an expert in all things ear, nose, and throats. And if you have problem with your head and neck, he is the man that you want to see. He and his wife, Tony, who's with us today, are consummate stewards. They're great students of the land. They keep meticulous records on the family ranch. Their goals are to preserve that family heritage. Again, been in their family 138 years, and to help restore the native habitat. We share fence lines with them at the department. They're neighbors of the Muse Wildlife Management Area, and I'll be honest with you, we couldn't ask for a better neighbor than Paul and Tony Burns. And so we're delighted to have them with us today. So let's give him a round of applause. To his left is Jan Cato, and Jan and her husband have the distinction of being, I think, the only family in the state to be recognized with ecoregional land steward awards from the state in two ecoregions, the Tomahawk and Thorn Scrub and the Edwards Plateau. They went on to receive the Leopold Conservation Award, which is the absolute highest honor bestowed upon a private landowner in the state, coming from the department and our partners at the Sand County Foundation. And Jan and Jack, again, have just set the bar so high. Jack came to Austin to accept the award. Jan stayed back at the ranch cutting down juniper trees, and so she let him get all the glory. So we're putting her up on the dais today to help tell their story. The Stockard Sirianni Ranch down in South Texas in the brush country is a ranch that they utilize, again, to manage for habitat diversity. They manage their livestock, their wildlife, their game. They have many partners that come onto the ranch to help them. Their Buck Hollow country in the Edwards Plateau in Real County, again, they manage for habitat diversity. They have a host of rare species from Texas snowbells to towbush fishhook cactus to golden cheek warblers and black-cap vireos and probably too many deer like the rest of the hill country. They placed a conservation easement on the ranch with the Nature Conservancy, and again are just consummate land stewards in our state. And so we're awfully pleased to have Jan here with us today. So Jan, welcome. And last but not least is Sarah Mitchell. And Sarah is the director of the Cooks Branch Conservancy, just an extraordinary piece of our home ground located in Montgomery County around Houston. She has very ably and capably carried on a multi-generational family commitment to helping to conserve some of the best of the piney woods. They're in an area that, if you know that area, is rapidly urbanizing, and so they have some challenges that many other landowners in this room face, and some don't. They have really pioneered some things in that part of the world. They've established co-ops with private landowners to implement prescribed fire, again, in an area where managing smoke really matters because of neighbors. They have in Stewart one of the largest concentrations of red-cockaded woodpeckers in the state, and that speaks to their extraordinary management of the pine trees and the pine uplands on that property. They take great care, the bottomland hardwoods in the prairies. They've been a great partner with the department on the restocking of eastern turkeys, and Sarah has just done a masterful job carrying out a vision laid out by her grandparents, Cynthia and George Mitchell. She too was the recipient 2 years ago of the Leopold Conservation Award, and it was a great honor to present it to the Mitchell family for their stewardship in our fine state. So these are our panelists this afternoon. Let's give them all a big round of applause again. With no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Paul Burns. Paul.
Thanks, Carter. Thanks very much. My great-grandfather started the ranch in 1873. Ranch is in Brown County, near Brownwood. I grew up on the ranch. The family had raised cattle and sheep, and there was some farmland. Some of the ranch was lost during the Great Depression of the 1930s, and then about 40 years ago, I decided to reaccumulate the ranch. The ranch had been overgrazed for decades, and it was in terrible shape. We began to improve the ranch with the usual things of modern grazing techniques, brush control, and it helped, but I was never happy with it. My wife, Tony, who's here today, has a very perceptive saying, "Life changes in ordinary moments." Life changes in ordinary moments. Serendipity struck twice, and our life took a turn. One day while seeing patients in the office, I got a call from a patient in Florida who I'd operated on for cancer of the parotid gland, and he thought that he had a recurrence. He was a CEO of a major corporation and had lived all over the world. He came in the next day, and it was not a recurrence, and so we had some time to visit. And just kind of out of the blue of thinking of something to talk about, I asked what advice he could give for a daughter whose husband worked for ExxonMobil and who also had lived all over the world. What can I do to help the family? He thought very carefully for a while, and he said, in that ordinary moment, my life took a turn. He said, provide a place your grandchildren can call home. No matter what happens, marriage, career change, move to a different city, a different country, something that is always the same, and it's home. No matter where they are in the world, when they get back, it is home. My wife and I talked about it, and we decided that that place would be the ranch. Serendipity struck again after I retired, and we were visiting our daughter in England. We visited William Blake's grave, and then in that ordinary moment as a tourist, we read the words that he wished to have on his grave: to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. I told Tony that that's the ranch, and that's what I want to do, and that's where I want to devote my resources and my energies. Again, life changes in ordinary moments. For the first time, I could see what I wanted to do with the ranch and why. And at that time also, we decided to go all in. I decided not to use 1873, when the ranch was founded, as my benchmark, but the late 1700s, before cattle and before settlers, knowing that we could never restore it back to the 1700s, but that would always be our goal and our benchmark. We restored everything on the ranch: 7 houses, the old historic barns, all the grasses back to native grasses, the trees, the springs, everything. So in 2 ordinary moments, first we decided to make a common home for all the family, an anchor, a place to enjoy, a refuge for our family, a peaceful place to restore the soul as we have restored the land. Secondly, as you study Blake's poem and try to understand the ranch, you study and try to understand the world. You can take a ranch and ruin it, or you can see a heaven in it. If you can appreciate the existence of vast truths in the smallest of things, you can gain knowledge and enlightenment that stays with you throughout life. If we teach our grandchildren to protect the most vulnerable animal, they understand to protect the most vulnerable human. It is close to practicing medicine, except now I care for the plants and the animals and the land and the water and gently guide the entire ranch. Restoring a habitat is like helping a sick patient get well. I measure success in many ways, but one of my greatest pleasures came when my granddaughter told me that one of her essays this year for admission to college was about the ranch. Tony and I feel that we have done our best. Perhaps the best legacy Tony and I could leave is when the grandchildren of their grandchildren may spend time on the ranch, that they may think of Tony and me fondly. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Paul. That was just wonderful. Thank you. Jan, would you come up and share a few words with? Hey, tough act to follow. I'll stall as long as you want me to. Yeah.
Happily, most of you do not know me very well, but speechless is not what you normally associate with me. But that was so beautiful and so exemplifies, I think, what all of us in this room are really striving for, is to leave a better place, or to leave the original place, or to be a good steward while we have the opportunity. As a young person, I went to Camp Waldemar in the Hill Country. I have the very fondest memories of that gorgeous place. And of course, that's what I thought country living was. Little did we think about the fact there was a wrangler, and there was a barn, and there was a tennis teacher, and somebody kept the courts, and somebody did the cooking. Somebody else put in the trails, and I don't know. But it was idyllic, and I wanted to return there. And so when I married, I told my husband, I sure would like to have a place in the Hill Country. Well, my father had a place in South Texas, and we loved going there, and that really is a place that was sort of home for my children. We take them fishing and hanging out, and they loved it there. And my dad was doing the management in the, kind of old Texas way. I've told this story to some of you in the room earlier. He told the foreman, he said, go out, there's some red ants by the gate, go out and poison them. So Jack's thinking this over, and he goes over, he says, just don't do that. You don't have to do that. So, okay, that's fine. And then for some reason, my dad gets in the truck and goes to town, and he comes back and approaches this same foreman and said, well, I thought I told you you poisoned those ants. And Gilbert said, oh, yes, sir, I'll get right on it. So he comes back to Jack and says, now what do I do? And Jack says, just don't do it. So, about 3 days later, my dad is all over Gilbert. And Jack says, well, okay, we've got to get our own place. I can't come tell this man how to manage his place, but I can't watch this. So we really put on the thrust to buy our own ranch, which is the serendipity why it is that we get to have 2 ranches, because my father would be 103 today. And I mean, not today, but now. And he's passed, and so Jack got to take over the management of that ranch as well. We both were under the impression that the best thing that we could do would be to reestablish native grasses, native plants. Oh my goodness, there's my photo. There's a scary thing. we wanted to reestablish what was there for the health of the native plants and animals, and in particular in the hill country. Those of you that spend any time there, there's a lot of stuff there that doesn't belong there. To my amazement, there were Corsican sheep and aoudad sheep, and I don't know, maybe audads do belong there. All kinds of exotic axis deer and of course hogs. And so when we bought our ranch, we called the Texas Parks and Wildlife to ask them to come out and make a management plan, and they did a survey. Came to the conclusion, they said, you need to take 300 mouths off this ranch this year. And Jack and I said, oh, no problem, we don't have any cattle. And he said, I didn't mean cattle. Well, we don't hunt. And so think 300 animals, that's almost one a day. And we also committed to, if you shoot it, you have to eat it. And so a very daunting task. So we wrestled back to Houston, all of a sudden asking all of our friends, do you hunt? Does your son hunt? Does anybody want to come hunt? Anybody want to clean these animals and take them away? So we went on in an effort to try to, now there's a baby bird. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, so we decided to make an effort to manage this property. And I won't go into any more details except for to tell you that it has been so rewarding. It's been the joy of our lives. It's the one thing that really holds our marriage together because we have a common purpose. We've had the extraordinary fun of being the land steward recipients this year, and so many of the things that we get to take credit for are things that were already there that we just didn't mess with. Now, probably my mantra more than anything is less than more. Less is more. Fewer bottles, fewer clothes, fewer roads, fewer machines. That just, if you'll just leave it alone, it'll heal itself. Anyway, I'm so pleased to be here today. I know the reason that we were honored was because of putting the conservation easement on the land. I'm so thankful to those of you who made that an option for those of us who want to conserve, because there are many forces that would keep you from doing it by yourself. So we're partners in this. I get to stand up and talk to you and have my picture up from time to time, but you are the ones that made it possible, and I thank you.
Thank you, Jan. If you saw the bead of sweat running down my forehead, I'm hoping beyond hope our biologist did not tell you you could shoot a deer every day of the year. Okay, good. Little details for the commissioned ones of us in the audience. Sarah Mitchell, Sarah, it's all yours.
This is so much more entertaining than I anticipated. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to be really brief, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. But I thought a lot about today, and many of you may or may not know that I am now the director of Cooks Branch Conservancy, which is about 5,600 acres in East Texas on the western fringe of the Piney Woods. And as it began, my grandfather was the one that founded it back in '64, and at that time it was slated to be part of phase 2 of the Woodlands Plan community. So it was purchased along with 23,000 other acres in a large land move made by a development corporation. My grandfather, being sort of the instinctive naturalist and land lover that he was in his private life, drove this property and couldn't let go. So he carved a little piece out of that 23,000 acres for himself and his family, and that was the beginning of Cooks Branch, which was then named the Woodlands. He later went on to develop the actual Woodlands and stole the name, so we renamed according to a creek running through our property. Anyway, so for me as a third generation, that was a place I grew up, falling in love with nature. And it was really special to me, and I could tell you a million stories, but went on to study the sciences, and then ended up going into environmental consulting, and things came full circle, and family asked me to get involved at a later date. So here I am. And I thought a lot about what does land stewardship mean to me? And I think that what it means to me is to love the land, first and foremost, and to move away from the feeling of being a manager and more towards sort of nurturing the health of the land. As you said, let it do its, its own thing. And the most important piece of that for me is recognizing that you're just one small piece of this larger system, one bit of the whole. And so I always ask myself, well, what am I doing? What is my part of the whole? And that's how I feel about land stewardship. I think it's sort of our responsibility, but also we're just a small piece in that dynamic system. To nurture has evolved in my mind, and I would add that to nurture to the best available science at your moment, because obviously that's changed a lot. In the 60s, my grandfather was importing audads and axis deer, and not really, planting improved grasses that, have been the bane of my existence for the last 8 years. So we're constantly adapting and growing, and I think that's probably a really important part of the definition for me, is being open to adapting and open to new opportunity and new threats and new lessons and new research, which can be hard when you're 90, as we kind of argued a bit when we first entered the Safe Harbor program in 2001. There was a lot of fear around a partnership with the government and what were we committing to. And anyway, that was sort of a changing point for us, is when we did take that leap into our first partnership with Parks and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, because we happen to have this federally endangered species on our property. And I think that pushed all of us in the family to really start to grow and learn and consider, what are we doing? And that's the moment when, even though we had been protecting this place for decades, it really transitioned into an active restoration project. And it's been sort of internal in that way for the last 20 years, just sort of going along and being the best place it can be. But that brings us to sort of the next juncture in the future for myself and for our family, and now for our foundation, which holds 90% of the property, is what are we going to be looking outward? How are we going to be the best platform for land stewardship that we can be? And how do we help spread the message of conservation and share what we've learned through research and trial and lots of error? And they say failing forward now. We've done a lot of failing and a lot of recovery, and so is it our role? I think it is, to put that back into the world. It was one of the teachings of the Leopold Award that our board really took to heart, was, we kind of now have this responsibility to share everything that we've discovered with everyone else. So here we are, and the future, as we design our programs, I think will include things that didn't exist before: education, research, advocacy, and hopefully a lot more conservation in our watershed beyond our boundaries. So anyway, thanks for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all for those insights. Absolutely wonderful. I'm going to open it up with a question and then open it up to the audience, in which we have the Q&A as part of this, and maybe build on something that Sarah touched on that I think was particularly astute. That is, stewards, we learn the most through trial and error, and arguably learn the most from our failures. And so I'm going to ask each of you to look back in time at perhaps your greatest failure, and what's that one point that you wish you could hit the reset button on and have helped you learn to be a better steward going forward. And so who wants to tackle that one first? Let's let the otolaryngologist tackle it first. So Dr. Burns, you're up.
I probably had more failures than anyone, so let me go ahead and go first with that. One of the most difficult things with our ranch is that we started out 40 years ago, and we started doing the usual things that you do, grazing management, brush control, things like that. But it was all, I would go to a course on brush control, and then I would start doing brush control. And I would go to a grazing management course, and I would start doing that. but it wasn't, there was no overall plan that I had written down. And if I could give anyone any advice, the advice I would do before you start out on all of these helter-skelter things, they're terribly expensive, and you can spend a lot of money, because we have, and a lot of time, is to get you an overall plan, work it out, and write it down. And then when we got that, then everything that we decide to do or want to try to do, we judge it against our overall plan, our mission statement, and it really, really has helped us.
Yeah, well said. Thanks, Paul. Sarah, Jan, offer any observations?
Well, I'll just mention that we were prevented a little bit of that. Some of you may know a man named Patrick O'Connor from the NRCS. He came and sat with us and cautioned us just as you did. He assured us that one man with a bulldozer could do more damage in a day than you could imagine, and that we just best take our time and conserve our energies. And so for us, this has been a 15-year progress, and that's been good. We got interested in fire as a management tool, and we took ourselves off to burn school and brought our foreman with us, and we just got all excited about burning. And so I won't mention by name, but our TPWD biologist came out, and here we are standing at the corner of this field, where it's all full of KR blue stem grass, with a box of matches.
They make me proud, Jan, every day. It's yeah.
Well, the good news is it would not light. We later then, after we'd gone to school and knew we knew so much, did proceed to burn the same field about 5 times in a single year. Boy, was it pretty. And then we did it one last time, and I say last with emphasis, because the wind changed while the little fires down in the creek bed, which we thought, well, it's down in the river, no problem, and a bunch of debris down there, we're so glad to get rid of it. And then a norther came in, and it came back around and burned our only log cabin. And we would have tried to rebuild it, which would have cost us a fortune, and who knows where we'd have found the old cedar to match what was there, except for it burned absolutely to the ground. And not only that, we had to pay our hunters who had things stored in that cabin. And so we haven't done any burning without professional help. Thank you, Nature Conservancy, for sending your people. And I admit I occasionally get impatient with them. They do so much measuring and talking and determining and teaching and crews and fire trucks but we haven't had another disaster. So.
Well, I was going to relay a similar disaster that involved a highly skilled burn crew applying burns, which were this was early days, so our family would come to me and say, why are we burning down the forest? What are we doing? You know, there was a huge educational curve there, but at the same time, we were implementing for the first time some invasive species herbicide mitigation, some annual work, and that was not very popular with our board at all. They didn't want to use any herbicides, but we're battling tallow and all kinds of things, and we were trying to catch up. So coincidentally, we subcontracted this herbicide application that went terribly awry and killed about 300 acres of ancient hardwoods. And that was everyone was devastated, of course, but they were just sure it was the fire. And so they weren't sure we should be using fire as a tool anymore. And this was a major crisis for us, obviously. Anybody that works with restoration in the piney woods, fire is what had moved us forward so far. And so it really took on about 1.5 years of an educational process to bring everybody back on board. And they just didn't believe that it was herbicide. They thought it was surely fire. So.
Great story. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. What questions do we have out there? Let's open it up to the audience. Any questions for our panel? Oh, this group of wallflowers. All right, all right. Well, let me ask another one while y'all are thinking about yours. So, the three of you have been, again, model stewards, and you've demonstrated that in so many ways. What level of influence have you seen on your neighbors as you have practiced and preached about what we speak today?
You want to go?
I'll go first. Yeah. You know, Carter, that's really a very, very interesting question, and it gets to the heart of one of the problems that I've had since I started doing this. The nice advantage that I have is I grew up on the ranch, and so I am from Brown County and from Brownwood. And then I spent my entire life, professional life, here in Austin, and was chairman of the board of the Austin Lyric Opera and so forth. So I can relate to, because of my birth and my profession, I can relate to this extremely difficult urban-rural divide. And that, I think, is my real advantage to helping Parks and Wildlife, who Carter said was next door to us, is that if there is a problem with one of our neighbors, I can get in my old pickup and my old clothes and drive over there and talk about the weather, and in about 30 minutes I can solve the problem, and Parks and Wildlife never even knew I did it. And I can go down to NRCS or any of the others. So I think that it's a real advantage that landowners have, like myself, who can deal with other landowners, that their professionals have a lot of trouble dealing with them. I see that their professionals are very extremely knowledgeable and very good and very diplomatic, but there is not the same lifelong of trust that I have that I can bring to the table with the landowners that almost no one else can do.
Well, I have to come from exactly the opposite direction. How I wish I had that level of in that contact, because I have good neighbors, and my neighbors are for the most part, very conservation-minded, but for the most part, they also are making a living off of their ranches, whereas I'm not. And so we have a different perspective over things. And I have thought, actually, maybe, first of all, I was embarrassed at that wonderful introduction that Carter gave me, because you never feel like you've deserved all that acclaim. But my desire with my neighbors is to make a relationship and hopefully lead them towards conservation. And I have to say, in my association with them, which has been gentle, I have learned so much about land management and their ways of management from them. Trying to be more of a listener than a teacher, but and particularly in the hill country, I'm an outsider. I'm a city girl, and I'm not in a position to tell them anything anyway. So I try to be an example of somebody that's not going to push them around. We haven't had any disputes. Well, we had one immediately knuckled under a boundary dispute, and he knew so much more than I did. I said, "Sure, put your fence there." Oops. But anyway, it wasn't a crucial thing. But that relationship between neighbors is so important, and I'm particularly thinking about a ranch to the north of mine that has not been managed in the entire time that we've owned our ranch. The owners of the ranch to the north of us, which is a substantial size ranch, have never gone there. They've never been there. And 2 years ago, their foreman died, and now they just don't have a foreman. And it affects us because their cattle come through the fence and push over our feeders that makes our hunters mad. But what I would like to do over time is make a relationship with their lawyer and present to them that they might actually benefit from putting an easement on the ranch, that they could then have a partner that would help them manage the ranch, and that would be beneficial to them for tax purposes down the line. And I know I need to bide my time. I hope I don't die before I take my opportunity. But that's my desire. If I could contribute that one thing, I'd feel like I'd done a good job.
Sarah?
Well, I personally live in Austin, so the calls that I have with our neighbors are more, I'd like to get to know you, and I'd like to show you what we're doing and learn what your needs are. But I think they're, as you described, a wealth of information as to what is missing, what do you need to help protect your land in perpetuity, is that possible? And if so, where are the gaps? I think in our space there is a need for things like estate planning and legal assistance, accounting, and those are things we're looking into offering as workshops for our neighbors, just because I think there's such a void around us there, and it's something we had to familiarize ourselves with in our process of moving from a privately held ranch to, giving away our development rights and passing it along to the foundation and restructuring. So I think that we have sort of a in-house capacity that might be beneficial to our neighbors, but they have to want that too, and I'm still in the process of investigating what do they want to learn. I don't know.
Any questions out there? There's a question. Mr. Kelsey?
I don't know that we have time to cover this, but what about hog control on your ranch?
Feral hog control. Anybody have any feral hogs on their ranch?
Yeah, I want to tell this story. When Jack and I were new to the hill country, we had a foreman who'd been around for a long time, and turned out that a guy who actually was neighbors with my dad's ranch, just coincidentally, decided he was going to do a bow and arrow hunting operation on his place. And we'd been trapping hogs, and I don't know how the word had gotten out, but somehow or another he called our foreman, and he said, I've got 1,000 acres down here. I want to do a hunting operation. I'd like to come pick up some hogs, because anybody that'd take them could have them for free. And he says, I've got 1,000 acres. How many hogs do you think I need to stock it? And Jim says, 1. Anyway, on our 2 ranches, we've had 2 separate ways of hog control. In South Texas, we have a Mexican family who have just been invaluable to us, and they go out about once every 2 months with dogs and actually hunt these hogs. And Gilbert comes up to the house one day. He has a hog the size of a small cow on the back of his truck, and I thought he brought it just to show me, how huge it was. Oh no, he was going to cook it for his church. So I said, well, that's great, Gilbert. And he said, well, I'll bring you some. And I'm going, oh, no, thank you. I thought if they're bigger than this, they did. I'm telling you, he knew how to cook that hog. He brought us enough to feed this entire room, and it was delicious. So that was good. And then in the part of the country where we were trapping hogs, we continue to run a trapping operation. And but we're leased for hunting. And so that's part of our hunters. They have a mandate, what they can take and what they must take. And so we have an active hog hunting. And, I'm sure you're all aware that hogs are like dogs. They have a litter of puppies or shotes, and then they reach sexual maturity within the year and have another litter. And so it's not like your deer population where if you have a really good year, they have twins. And so it is a constant problem, but we are actively working on that at all times.
Yeah, the same. We're always actively hunting them. Our staff is. We actually don't allow any hunting or firearms on the property for non-staff, but interestingly, we've come around to the idea of maybe opening up for hog hunting just because we cannot stay on top of it. But I'm holding out hope for the new feed that Parks and Wildlife is developing, right? The nitrate, whatever.
So, the sodium nitrite.
Sodium nitrite.
Mm-hmm. Yep, good. Okay, Paul, you want to add anything to that?
Just one thing, because it kind of reinforces what I said a while ago. There was a problem on our ranch, of course, with hogs in the wildlife management area next to us. And one of the neighbors, who was a pretty influential neighbor, was absolutely kind of livid that the Parks and Wildlife wasn't taking care of the hogs. And it was causing a lot of trouble, and it was not legitimate at all, what he said. But it just took one visit from me to go over and talk to him, sit down, visit with him for a few minutes, and assure him that we were cooperating with Parks and Wildlife. We were flying helicopters, we had hog traps, we were shooting them. And the whole problem changed from a cooperative, from uncooperative to a cooperative thing. So you do have to surely cooperate with all the other landowners, and it's not easy.
I had just another little tidbit on hogs. As I said, we have a hunting lease, and one of our hunters reported that he had seen a bear, and we're in cooperation with Texas Parks and Wildlife to try to reestablish native populations, and we do have kind of, I think, a healthy population of mountain lions. So this story of a bear was exciting, and everybody wanted to know where he'd seen it and when he'd seen it and this kind of stuff, and he reported having seen it two separate times, and then, of course, this bear turned out to be a hog.
Good question. Kathy, you had your hands up back there. Kathy Howe. Yeah, Kathy.
I was wondering if any of the panelists allow oil and gas activities to occur on your properties, and if so, if you had any tidbits to share on balancing conservation with that kind of development.
Question.
Can I answer
Sure,
that
Paul,
first?
please.
We are so committed to our ranch being not pristine, but taking it back to the 1770s. There was no oil and gas production in the 1770s here, that we do not have any hunting, we don't have cattle, we do not have wind, we do not have any oil and gas leases. We have decided as a family to forego everything that might be detrimental to our ranch in order to restore it back to the way it was in 1770. It gives up a lot of income, but the family's doing okay, and it's been worth it. But it's surely not the usual thing.
Anybody have a different experience?
Nope, exactly the same.
We have a very different experience in that our founder was adamantly determined to drill on the Conservancy, which was not, no one else was happy about. Fortunately for us, there were leases in place to other operations that dated back for a long time, and those haven't been in production for the last many years, and actually the leases were terminated because of lack of production. So we've been lucky. We kind of won the legal lottery there. They're now gone. Of course, they contaminated everything, so we've been in a legal battle for, 6 years trying to get cleanup. Hasn't happened. So there's the potential that one day we would re-drill again if gas goes above 550 and stabilizes. But I don't think I doubt that will happen in the next decade.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Good question. Yes, sir, in the back.
Has Sarah or someone described how all these foundations have worked out for preserving the land?
Sarah?
You mean structure-wise or ownership or?
Basically, in general, how was it easy to set up and has it met your expectations?
It was not easy, and it was very expensive. And we were in an unusually fortunate position to be able to fund all of the legal research that went into creating the structure. But I think that there were probably easier routes. We were trying to give it to our foundation, which is, sort of like there were all kinds of issues to circumvent there, but the Conservancy is now an operating program of our foundation, which I think you'll see fairly frequently for parcels that are held by foundations. It's run as one of our programs. It does mean that the founding family is a disqualified party. So it introduces all kinds of exclusionary issues that were a really sad thing to accept as a family. And it brings us to what was sort of my proudest moment, was when everyone voted unanimously that protection in perpetuity was more important to them than access or financial gain. So there was a very hard decision to make there. And if it hadn't been unanimous, it wouldn't have happened. So it wasn't easy. It took probably 3 years. But now it's working beautifully. And now we don't have to worry about, the land itself being under so much financial pressure like most of you guys experience. I mean, it just isn't a burden in your estate. It would be totally unfeasible for us to have held on to the property. So everyone wins this way.
Jan, you want to add something to that?
Well, we don't have a foundation, and so we didn't have to go through that. And I just happen to be slightly familiar with your family to know that there are so many parties involved. In our case, in my father's ranch, there were 3 heirs, and so, and it does not have an easement on it. We just, as a family, sit down and say, what are we going to do? And for the most part, whatever Jack wants to do or whatever I want to do, everybody's happy to let us do it. But I'm assuming that there are people in the audience, I may be wrong, who are considering doing a conservation easement and just want to know from an owner, is it an easy decision? And it's not an easy decision. You're giving up a potential to make a lot of money, and you're not only making that decision for yourself, you're making that decision for your kids, your grandkids, and, you know, maybe you can afford to do it now, and maybe it'll be harder for them to afford it down the line. But I assume that I speak for all 3 of those of us at this table, that we would have done the same management practice nonetheless, and having the easement gives us the opportunity to have a partner. It gives us the peace of mind of knowing that down the line, no rogue is going to step in and mess up that thing that we all consider to be more valuable than anything else we could contribute. I mean, I'm sure that I know for me, this is my largest financial interest, and I don't regret one penny of it. It's been fabulous.
Thank you. Yeah, right here.
Y'all have all touched on this in your beautiful perspective on y'all's family's lands, but out of curiosity, in the time that you've spent restoring and enhancing your land and establishing your legacy, what's important to you, what just in general life lessons have you learned from the 4-legged wildlife you've seen on your property and the 2-legged wildlife you've had to deal with getting this done?
You bet. So her question is really kind of, what are the life lessons they've learned from, that have come from the land, the 4-legged wildlife, the 2-legged neighbors, and what are those kind of prominent life lessons that have affected them and influenced them? So any observations y'all want to share?
For me, after practicing medicine, which was very fulfilling, I struggled for a few years after I retired. And this has been one of the most gratifying things that I've ever done in my life. And I started out, the ranch is owned by my brother, also by my brother and sister, and then each of us have 2 children. So there's a lot of family members that are involved, and I think that it has brought almost unbelievable a sense of satisfaction to Tony and myself. And the other thing it's done, it has been very, very rewarding and bringing all of our family together. Every day that whoever's at the ranch, we all get together for 1 meal a day, for example, no matter what you're doing, and then everyone's doing their own thing. So it's really been a very, very satisfying thing for keeping the family close, even though we've all have different needs and wants. We all finally come together and decide what we want to do. For the 4-legged, boy, it is so nice to drive across that ranch and see what we've done.
Well, this isn't 4-legged, but the 2-legged. We have a very, very dear friend who asked if he could come and bring his sister and his son to hunt wild turkeys. And we weren't too big on people hunting wild turkeys, but we said, okay, they could take 2 turkeys a year. And so they came the first year and they brought this group and they had a wonderful time. We were delighted to have them there. We were there at the same time. And they came the next year. Each year they took their 2 turkeys. And in the meantime, they observed that Jack and I walked everywhere that we went. We always had our binoculars with us. We never sat in a blind. We just carried our nippers and cut the juniper and took the dogs with us. And so about 3 years ago, I noticed this. The guy's our vet. I noticed Dr. Tom in his truck. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm just taking my binoculars and looking at the birds." So they've given up shooting the turkeys. They've kind of taken over. So the next thing I knew, his sister and her partner were out in the field cutting the ash juniper. because that's what they saw us do, and they knew that we loved it. And they just totally changed their behavior to kind of model our behavior. And we noticed that the people that actually have a hunting lease with us and pay us for the privilege to go out there call us on the phone and say, what can we do to help? You know, we want to do something. And so they were the ones that pulled some old pipe out from the spring that was unsightly, something that we didn't have the manpower to do. They just got out there with their crew and pulled it out. And then Jack gave me for Christmas one year a butterfly garden. Unfortunately, did not give me a butterfly gardener. And so the management is mine, but we now have so many butterflies that you can't read a book on the porch because there are things flipping around out there all the time. And so now we have birders that come. We have people that come every year and do bird banding. They've come for 7 years in a row, and they've actually caught one bird 7 years in a row. This little thing flies off somewhere and comes back every single year. And they do a bird count every year. So whereas Jack and I can't identify, we can barely tell a hawk from a bluebird, but they can, and so they monitor and give us a list, and it's just exciting. It's so fun. So I don't know too much about the four-legged things except for our dogs, but the birds and the butterflies are great.
That's hard because there's so many lessons, but I think watching nature heal itself has been so rewarding, as you alluded to. And I've had the opportunity to see, 35 years of it now, which is pretty wild. And it's very inspiring. And I think another thing that I've taken away is that humans and animals, but humans really can't be in nature without feeling connected and being inspired. And like you described, people come out and it changes them a bit. And we were lucky to have exposure like that to open land, and it's just dwindling so much, and even the families that have it now probably won't be able to keep it. So it's something I think about a lot, and I think about protecting more, public open space, because I think as a child or as an adult, if you're out there in it, you care about it. I mean, it's rare to meet someone that doesn't care. I don't think I have, really. And so sometimes it's misdirected, but it's not for lack of caring.
Well said. Richard.
You're apparently doing something right to get all these accolades, but I'm curious what your own personal or family management measures of success are. How do you measure your success? What are your metrics?
How much time do you have? Well, I mean, they're just the purely spatial, right? How many acres of preserved clump grass habitat have we provided back into the system? How many acres do we burn every year on our, 3 to 5 year rotation? What's our, progress on invasive species mitigation? And are we really getting ahead of some of those Asiatics? But also just population size of our endangered woodpeckers. Are they expanding into new habitat? Is it the kind of quality where they'll actually start to excavate their own cavity and not use just the inserts that we provide? We've put in over 260 inserts, which they'll use immediately. And then, as we've found, they'll start excavating their own home right away, if they're happy there, right? If they're not just desperate. So for us, there are a lot of really basic measures that we have, that we keep track of and have to, but also for fun. We have 30 permanent forest plots, which are personally some of my favorite because they're unlocking some of these sort of discoveries, like I was talking about earlier, that are surprising even to our scientists. For example, and we haven't published this yet, but we have one annual burn block, which is an experimental block. We've burned it every year for 7 years now. It has the highest botanical diversity of any piece of the property. And everything in our history, all the data available to us says this was most likely 5 to 7 year cycle. Well, here we are looking at the return of the herbaceous species. You can't argue against it. Here it is. most diversity. And so it makes you question, maybe we really did have more frequent fires. Maybe the lightning fires we have every year actually did traverse most of our ecosystem. So it's, I don't know how, I'm on a tangent, but we measure a lot of things, and also just, you know, bobwhite quail and Henslow sparrow returning on their own because they actually have habitat. Things like that are pretty magical.
Set. Anybody want to share another observation on that? Paul?
We've put a lot of effort into that, and we monitor everything we do on the ranch, and we started that a good many years ago, so that we have a log of every rainfall that's occurred on the ranch for the last 15 years, the temperature on the ranch, everything that we do on the ranch. We have a control plot beside it where we don't do anything to it. We have photo stations all over the ranch where we have monitored those now for about 15 years to see the progress. And then annually, we evaluate our successes on about 8 or 9 criteria that we've set up kind of arbitrarily when we started our plan in the first. And it's one of the most fun things that I do. Maybe it's because of my background in medicine. You kept chart of the patient, you know. So we have a complete chart on everything that's been done on the ranch. And so it's not, I'm surprised at the question. I don't think I've ever gotten that question before, because it's such a big part of my life at the ranch is monitoring everything and make sure what our successes are and our failures. And we use that then very extensively to try to decrease those, I mean, we eliminate practices that are not worthwhile. So it's a good question, thanks.
One last question before we break. Yeah, Colin.
Kind of an addition to Richard's question, but on a more personal level, what kinds of wildlife have spoken to you most meaningfully in a positive way as a reflection of your stewardship activities that you've tuned into over the years?
When we started out, we decided not to manage for any type of wildlife, deer, quail, because if you say you manage for quail, then you've got a picture of what your ranch looks like. If you manage for deer, you've got a picture of what it looks like. So we decided to take not those usual things like that, even though we do censuses of all those, and we have for many years. We've decided, or I have, to monitor a little bit more esoteric things. Some birds that are not endangered species, although we do have those, but monitor, for example, scissor-tail flycatchers that come in and log that in when they come each year. And the other thing that's very important to us is arthropods on the ranch, because it's such an indicator of of our health of our soil and our grasses. And
Such a scientist. I'm humiliated over here. One thing that I've noticed, and it answers kind of both these questions maybe, or just brings up other questions. Jack and I are interested in birds, and like I said, we have a good connection with the birding community, and so we monitor our birds probably more than anything else. And it interests me that you'll have a huge influx of a particular population of birds one year, and you'll never see them again. And we were talking earlier about the rare and endangered species, and if you have a conservation easement here but not one next to it, what is the effect? And I'm saying that these things are nationwide. I mean, it has to do with whether or not it's too cold in the north, or if it's raining next, in the next state, or things. I mean, one year we just had this just unbelievably profuse population of this bird, and we've never seen it again. The first year that Jack and I actually spent a summer at the ranch, we had scissor-tail kites. And oh my gosh, they were so fabulous. And they had their nest just across the river. And our patio's right here, just like this, like they were right there. So we put up a scope, and oh man, we watched them. We watched them kiss each other and feed each other and fly up and down the thing. We watched them have their babies. And we just thought, this is fabulous. We've never seen them again. And we thought, well, we did such a great job. There was plenty to eat here, and we kept our distance. So maybe so. I said we kept our distance. You may be absolutely right. I'm just saying that it's hard to monitor these things. You have your records. I have some records. I have a book over here and a computer over here, a little bit of that, little scraps of records, not the scientist here. But the main thing is the gift that it is to us just to see how diverse and to see a population disappear and then rebuild. And you actually, if you have this opportunity, and it really is only an opportunity. I mean, we can't take credit for any of this. We do feed our birds and do our best to maintain good habitat. But the truth of the matter is that you just get to watch what happens, and you can ruin it, but as far as fixing it, that's a little bit of different story. But it's great to watch and to share.
I think there are two answers for me. One would be, in general, just seeing with the restoration of the natural grasslands, all of the birds, whether they be migratory or permanent residents that return. No single species for me. It's just the experience of walking through the grass and flushing tons of birds. I think that's unbelievable. But I'm thinking more of Aldo Leopold and what he said about, all I've learned is that I love all trees, but I'm in love with pines. And that's kind of how I feel. And seeing the shortleaf pine regenerate after we've returned fire to the landscape, that to me is the most special.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I hate to bring this to an end, but let's give a big round of applause for these wonderful students and stewards of nature. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Sarah.